Hello and welcome to GreenBytes Wednesdays. GreenBytes Wednesdays is a podcast series where we facilitate critical conversations and steer consciousness when it comes to understanding the impact of our digital footprint across Nigeria's technology ecosystem. We hope that with this advanced knowledge, we can introduce you to some tools, trends, and best practices that can enhance your knowledge about digital sustainability. Are you curious about climate change? Are you a tech enthusiast or a climate entrepreneur? Come on board and learn on this episode as we get on with every conversation of the GreenBytes Wednesday podcast series. This podcast is proudly brought to you by Area I under the Scale Initiative, funded by the UK government through the Digital Access Program. My name is Seyifunmi Adebote and I am glad to be your host. Welcome on board. From ordering a ride to getting food on your table to traveling the world, all of these things really depends around, we can do from our digital phone, right? And this really tells a lot around sustainable consumption or consumption as individuals, as community, as a people. And what's the impact of all of this consumption made easy through technology or through digital approach? What's the impact on the environment? What's the impact when it comes to when we put it side by side with sustainability? That's going to be the focus of the conversation today. Welcome to GreenBytes Wednesdays. My name is Seyifunmi Adebote. I'm glad to host this conversation, and thanks to the UK government for making it possible for us to bring this episode and many more episodes to you. We hope that you check out previous episodes and also keep your fingers crossed for more episodes. You can find them on YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, and of course, Apple Podcast, or wherever it is you find your podcast. My guest today is Olubunmi. And it's such a pleasure to have you on the podcast, Olubunmi Olajide. I would refer to him as Olu during the conversation.
My pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
A podcaster to another, how do you feel?
I feel very good. It's nice to be on the other side of the seat.
I know how that feels. Great. And on GreenBytes Wednesdays, what we do is to facilitate critical conversations. And we hope that with these conversations, you, the listener, can have some reflective consciousness about the choices you make when it comes to our interactions or our engagements with digital landscape. We also hope that it can help us evaluate our digital footprints as a country, as a people. And most of all, we hope that with tips and tools and trends that we'll share on this conversation, you can make better choices when it comes to digital sustainability. I said the topic today is focused around reclaiming sustainable consumption in a digital age. And my first question, just before I get into conversation, I can't wait, but just a little bit about Olubunmi. Olubunmi is a commercial energy professional who's working in finance and deploying sustainable infrastructure projects in or across sub-Saharan Africa. And he works as the account manager at Odyssey Energy Solutions, where he deploys decentralized renewable energy projects through debt financing. Maybe I missed something out in your profile, Olu. How would you like to introduce yourself?
I think the best way people can know me is as an energy guy. My background is in petroleum engineering and a transition to clean energy about 5 years ago. And I'm very deeply passionate about the way that we interact with energy and other sustainability topics across our lives. Climate change might seem like something that's a very far off topic, but like we'll discuss today, we'll see that climate change and some other sustainability topics have more interface with our day-to-day than we realize.
Absolutely. And Olu also hosts the Energy Talks podcast. Feel free to check that wherever you find your podcast too. Great, free adverts. So do you think, my first question to you, Olu, do you think it is really possible for consumption to become more sustainable with digital space opening up and with more digital technology making it easy for us to buy and to just get everything we need? Do you think it's really possible for us to have sustainable consumption?
I think consumption in general, if you're looking at the trend line across the entire human existence, it's always gone up. And I don't think that we should be expecting that the consumption trend line will start to fall anytime soon. But I think that as consumers, something that we can be conscious about, especially people who are in a more fortunate situation, is how the things that you consume, where do they come from? How are they sourced? What are the policies guiding the fact that they can be recycled, for instance? I think that some consciousness can come around there, but that awareness is such an important fact because some people don't understand how their actions, let's say buying something cheap off Shein or something like that, can affect global supply chains and all these things. So awareness is an important first step in understanding the impact that your consumption has on the global planet on that scale.
Yeah, maybe we stay with that a little bit. This podcast, for example, is around awareness. Your Talk podcast is around awareness. I also host something called the Climate Talk podcast, which is around awareness. But how effective would you say these forms of communications are in sort of getting people really aware, and not just aware with the head knowledge, but also such that they can decide and say, hey, I want to do something with this knowledge I have?
That's a very good question. I think I can use my career as an example. I studied petroleum engineering, and I wasn't even aware of the effects of climate change or how the oil and gas industry was playing into that. It started when I started my podcast, started talking to people who were working in the sustainability field, and I started learning how perhaps me taking a job in the oil and gas sector wasn't the best way to advance what I thought at the time was very important to me, which is clean energy and sustainability. And having that knowledge and then moving into the clean energy space and then start asking yourself questions of how can I make the most impact? And that has caused me to make several career changes across my life. And I feel like that is the same journey that we want to take people on. We don't want to prescribe a certain path that they should take. We are just in a place where we should be saying that, hey, here's what's going on. Here's how your actions might be affecting things. Here's what's going on a global scale. And then you ask yourself that question with the knowledge you have, with the experiences you have, and where you are in the world. How can you make the most impact, and how can you make that impact in a way that feels beneficial to you as an individual as well?
Great. Thanks. Thank you very much. So let's get into conversations around this, consumptions and how it is very much based on, digital space and apps and other innovations that are opening up that space, and make the connection with climate or with the environment and with greenhouse gases emission. Is there really a connection between digital consumption and, greenhouse emissions, to put it at the least?
Yeah, and this is again getting people to see themselves as part of this, what I would call the circular economy. Everything you use, everything that we enjoy, everything that we consume, whether that is a material, a service, it's made or manufactured somewhere. And that manufacturing process, in one way or another, is going to lead to more greenhouse gas emissions. And you can be very aware of this by just looking around. So we are very used to being on the end of those service lines. For example, we just go to the shop, we see the brand new iPhone, we want to buy it immediately. But you don't know that this iPhone had to go through factories in China, sometimes in India, to California, get shipped back down to us here in Nigeria, for instance. That has taken such a large journey, and you should imagine the scale that those operations need to happen. So everything we buy, everything we're consuming, whether we are aware of it or not, we are making a vote to keep a certain process or a certain organization profitable. So that is where we need to see ourselves as part of a global ecosystem. And everything we make has some implications, whether it's going to increase greenhouse gas emissions. And then we need to ask ourselves the question of some certain products, is there a way to deliver them more efficiently? Is there a way to do it in a lower carbon emission delivery method? Is there a way that at the end of life, for instance, if you're upgrading your phone and you're throwing your other phone away, where does that phone end up? And you can go out of the technology space as well. You can go into clothes, into shoes, into something as simple as toothpicks, right? Everything has to go through manufacturing processes. And manufacturing processes at their core are going to be emitting greenhouse gases at some capacity. So being aware of that is one thing, and I'm sure we'll dig into more of that in this conversation.
Great. There's a book I read, probably you've read it, it's called Factfulness. It talks about how the world is actually getting better, economically speaking. So no matter how you want to complain about, economic issues in different parts of the world and inflations and the value of the currencies, what it's tried to do in that book, Hans Rosling is his name, if I recall rightly. What he tried to do in that book is to say that things that our grandparents could not afford, our children will easily afford. And things that we thought we could not afford, our children will very mindlessly just purchase it for us. And reflecting on my own journey, I think it is the truth. It is the truth. I knew visiting my grandfather, he was riding on bicycles. And yes, I have a bicycle, but I don't use that as my mode of transport. And I just imagine what will happen for the next generation. But the point that I wanted to make is that with more access to economic resources, with more push for people to feel along or to belong, I mean, where do you think we will get to with all of this consumerism that we as a people are sort of falling into?
Yeah, going back to my earlier point, we are on a trend line that says that humanity would not stop consuming goods. And if you look at Africa as a continent, for example, the population growth that is estimated for Africa over the next 30 years is going to be massive. I think at a certain point, we're going to be the most I think Nigeria alone is going to have like one of the largest youth population in the entire world, right? And you see that all those people are going to be aspiring to have better lives, as you alluded in your brief statement before. They are all going to want to be able to afford things that the other generation might have thought were luxuries, right? And obviously, that is going to increase the demand of those products. And then the industries that are meant to deliver those products are also going to grow because they are chasing the demand and they are chasing the revenue growth and profits that come with it. So we need to be very conscious of the fact that this is the global landscape that we're looking at. While population growth might decline in the US and in some parts of Europe, Asia and Africa are going to see massive population growth. And if the systems we have, let's say a system where a product is being made in a not very efficient manner, it's consuming too much electricity, it's consuming too much water, if we allow these systems to scale with how demand scales, we are setting ourselves up for really bad situations because they're going to keep their bad business practices and they're not going to want to adjust because it might cost them more money on the short term, but the long term it might benefit humanity more. So it's this balancing of we expect that the demand will grow and the demand will be driven largely by Africa, largely by countries in Asia as well. And we need to make sure that there are certain systems in place that, first of all, educates the consumer, going back to awareness, educates them about how their individual purchases actually affects them, affects the global economy. Yeah. And then back to the people who are actually manufacturing, there needs to be incentives for them to actually make their processes more efficient, whether that's using less power, using less water, using less harmful chemicals, whatever it is, they need to have less of a negative impact to the planet while they ramp up their means to deliver the goods that we do need or want to consume.
Maybe more of wants than need, if you ask me. And that's the concept of net zero also, that they can still produce these things, but balance some way. I'm quite skeptical, but that's on a personal note with the concept of net zero and what it really means and this carbon trading, but not on this, not as part of this conversation. But you sort of set the basis for my next question, where you made reference to different regions and the role in production: Africa, Asia, Europe, US. And it brings us to a point or to reflect on the inequalities that exist and how that also shapes access to, access to what people can sort of use and lifestyle. Take, for example, I was reading that the average person who comes from Africa, for example, uses very little. So it was like a diagram, and it showed this human figure, like a silhouette, and it shows that the water consumed on the African continent per person was just about the size of the leg. So just think of just one leg. And it compared this with Asia, and it's probably got to the knee, and then it compared it with places like Europe and then US, where it was the full body. So it tells you that with these inequalities existing, with different regions having different level of access to resources, financial resources, the demands also vary. My question to you, Olu, is this. We are really calling for development on the African continent, and by that, financial development. If Africa really gets it right financially and we become a very wealthy country, what do you think this would mean for our consumerism? And will, will this really be a challenge if we really, really want to achieve what we call, in this case, sustainable consumption?
That's a very good question. And I think to answer that, we need to first establish why, the African continent is uncompetitive in terms of manufacturing capacity. Why would Apple, for instance, choose to go to India or China to manufacture their iPhones? Why don't we see more large-scale manufacturing operations in the African continent? There are two major things. One I will speak more on, but the first one is infrastructure. There's such a large infrastructure deficit and gap where Africa does not have the infrastructure in place. We don't have good enough roads. We don't have good enough ports. We don't have a good enough electrical grid to actually power demand. All these things have added up on decades and decades of either misuse, mismanagement, not enough culture of actually doing maintenance on the infrastructure that exists. And then the second one is energy. Nigeria, an example, we barely produce enough energy that we need. And even after we've produced the energy, the transmission capacity is still very low, right? And then if you now want to expand that on a global scale, how Africa becomes competitive is by solving those two things. And with energy, there's a good opportunity here because we are seeing a lot of potential for solar especially, right? And that can start to plug some of the gaps that exist. But obviously solar has some use cases that are very good, but it cannot power large-scale manufacturing as of yet because battery technology is still too expensive. So now you need to look at what other assets do we have, which is natural gas, right? We've had natural gas for how many years, but we've not developed the infrastructure that it needs to actually stop the oil and gas producers from flaring their gas, for instance, because it's more economical for them to burn off a valuable natural asset than for them to actually find a way to commercialize that part of their operation. So these things really come into play. And if we can get to a place where the reason why I bring up those two things is we don't want a scenario where Africa grows, become more economically powerful, right? But we are still having demand for goods that are being imported from other countries. They are still controlling pretty much where our goods come from. We are not manufacturing our own needs by ourselves. So that's a very, very precarious place to be in where you have so much spending power, but yet the demand for goods that your citizens have is being serviced by other countries, and you're basically losing this global battle of trying to build your own industries, because that is where long term we're going to benefit from not just having money right now, is by having industries and sectors that can grow, and that can only come by investing in infrastructure, whether that's digital or physical, and also on the ability for Africa to generate enough energy to meet the needs of those industries that are in place.
Absolutely. Great. If we could bring it down to the individual level here, there are individuals who really struggle with these decisions. They know, they understand the impact on the environment. They know about companies or organizations that are not, sustainable in the way of doing businesses. And they as individuals want to do different. They want to act differently. They have, the works of people like us have made them more aware, and they really want to do something different. But they struggle with it because on Instagram, on YouTube, there is an advert popping up, there is someone recommending something, and they really struggle with this. And do you have any recommendation for such persons? Imagine that person is just sitting right next to you, not me.
I think on this particular topic, I have maybe a more controversial opinion. I feel like, yes, there is a place for a conscious consumer to make better decisions with what they have available to them. But sometimes you're only limited you can only do as much as your options allow, right? For instance, if you want to buy one product and you're trying to compare which of these products is more sustainably sourced, right? First of all, there's no way to know if you are just a regular consumer in Nigeria, for instance, across several product groups, right? And then the ones that say they are they actually being truthful by saying that they are targeting net zero and they're making whatever steps to achieve that, or is it just greenwashing? Is it just marketing, right? So that is where people are stuck. And obviously, there are some people who generally just can't afford to do better because sometimes the more sustainably sourced products might be more expensive. Exactly. Absolutely. So there is that inequality there as well. So I think it's very, sometimes it can be very misguided when you have a large corporation, like let's say a huge multinational telling a consumer, oh, the problem is that you are not making better decisions, and yet they are the ones who are trying to outsource labor to countries that have low labor cost and have just enough infrastructure for them to produce their goods at a low enough cost so they can maximize their profits, right? So it goes back to you being conscious as a consumer, but most importantly, the government plays such a huge role because if the government is active in this sector and the government is very clear on what it wants to produce, what it wants to promote, what industries it's seen as critical to the economical growth of the country, or even if we get to a place where countries start to coordinate in Africa, what is good for the continent, right? And then we have policies that lock into place because as much as large organizations might tell you that they care about doing good, at the end of the day, they are only driven by profits. They only want to make money. So the fact that companies would change what they're doing, change their business practices just because they just felt like, doing a global good is very unlikely. What can make them move and what can really move the needle is policy. It needs to be a rule. It needs to be in writing and everybody needs to get on board with it. And that is such a powerful role that I feel like government right now is starting to take up, but there's still some places where it's a bit passive. And if you have a passive government when it comes to actually setting policy that polices the way that large companies actually operate and not just maximizing profits over the concerns of their consumers, over the concerns of the environment, then it really limits your choice as a consumer because you're trying to choose between sometimes a lesser of two evils, right? And back again, sometimes it's just, you just want something. And I feel like for a lot of times, I've heard kind of like conversations that shape around, we need to make better conversations. It typically comes from somebody who is either from Europe or from America, really comfortable lives. Like you said, they use 10 times as much water, 20 times as much electricity as a regular African, and they're trying to kind of like make the moral responsibility be on the individual level. But the truth is that everybody deserves to have a better life. Everybody deserves to have their parents go from that bicycle to you owning a car, like to be able to have your parents in an apartment, for instance, or a house where they don't have to worry about the lights going out, right? So everybody has the right to aspire to a better life, whether that is genuine needs that they actually have to have, or just want to make their lives better. And I feel like we need to embrace the aspiration of people because Africans and Nigerians, we are very ambitious. We want better lives for ourselves, but we need to have the government and the corporations that provide us our goods also be in a place where they want to meet our needs at the best possible place that is beneficial to the environment, beneficial to cost as well. But also everybody needs to do better. And Absolutely. I feel like that is where we need to get to.
Yes, I do agree. It's going to take a lot of work and a lot of effort and collaborations on different parts. So it's going to be, I think of it as a marathon and not a sprint,
Oh, yes, it is. Yes, it is. But something I heard that a marathon is still a race.
Good way to think about it. I've been speaking with Olubunmi Olajide, the energy guy, and we've been speaking around reclaiming sustainable consumption in a digital age. Thanks for following through with the conversation. It's GreenBytes Wednesdays, and we're having these critical conversations with the hope that it can, in your own mind, present you with some reflective consciousness about your interactions with the digital space, but more importantly, with the environment and the place that we call home. I've been speaking with Olubunmi Olajide, and we've been having a very interesting conversation around reclaiming sustainable consumption. My next question to you, and after this we'll sort of take it home, is do you really think there is something to reclaim when it comes to sustainable consumption? Because from most of this conversation, it feels like we're just going to keep going overboard. So do you think there is something to reclaim when it comes to sustainable consumption, especially given all that the digital age affords us?
I feel like with the African continent, we are at a place where we have been playing catch up for a few years. We are seeing the effect of some good decisions. We are seeing our tech industries grow, which is amazing. But globally, you can see the trends that are moving. You can see that Africa is still like a bit behind. And a good example for that is how the AI industry is growing and the needs around that. And the reason why that's relevant is the AI industry uses a lot of capacity in terms of data centers, and we are seeing that driving a lot of cost when it comes to energy usage, to the point where new energy assets are being planned, built, and will be financed just to serve that industry, right? So you're seeing the rest of the world trying to boost up their energy capacity just to serve one industry, right? But in Africa, we have struggled to basically meet that, right? We can't think of one large industry that has kind of like spurred the entire country to go on this race to build up infrastructure just to meet this need that we know is going to be a global good for the next X number of years. So in that case, maybe not reclaiming is the right word, but we are playing a lot of catch up. But we have seen a lot of good come out of the sector as well. We have seen a lot of companies in Nigeria specifically. We've seen a lot of companies in the fintech space do very well, and they have also brought in a lot of infrastructure development because once they get those investment dollars, they have to build up the infrastructure for them to survive, and we are seeing the benefits trickle down to the rest of the economy. But that's not enough, quite frankly. We need to get to a place where the regular person can have their lives enriched, not just by having the means to consume more, but by having the means of productions, the industries, the supply chains benefit them as well, not just have us as the African continent, as Nigeria, just always being the off-taker, always being the one who is just buying. We need to also be the ones producing and
Producing
selling.
and exporting to the
Yeah,
world, to the rest of the
exactly.
world. So I totally agree with you, and we've been quite discussing a lot back and forth. And one thing that I keep thinking about is maybe it's good that we're playing this catch up because we can learn from the wrongs of other people. We don't necessarily have to do those things the way they've done it because we want to catch up. We can explore initiatives or innovations that helps us do it differently. And I do hope that one way or the other, as while playing this catch up, we can do it in a cleaner way that makes the world a better place. What will be the take home from all of this conversation? What do you want the listener, whoever is watching right now, to take home?
I think something very important is to remember that it's not all doom and gloom. We are playing catch up, but there's a lot of opportunity for us to harness. There's this term called leapfrogging, which sometimes I don't like, is that we can move from one place and we don't have to follow the development path that other countries follow. So, like you said, we can learn from other people and we can go instead of going 1, 2, 3 from what we've learned, we can go from 1 to 3 and then jump from 3 to 10, right? And we can find industries where it's possible for us to do that. And one way is energy, by developing energy assets in a decentralized way, not having them tied to a main grid has been one way that Africa in general has been leapfrogging how we solve our energy infrastructure challenges. So we need to find other opportunities that allow us to do that. And this is where the innovation of the continent needs to come up. This is where we need very strong, very ambitious individuals. And then we need systems, we need the policies to support them. We need, very importantly, money, investments, capital, low cost debt in order for them to be able to build and scale. And then we need the people that once we have those industries, we need to be very proactive to protect. So there's still a lot of hope. There's a lot of space for innovation. And that is genuinely what gets me very excited.
And if I could add, we need conversations like this to continue.
Yes, we
Thank
do.
you so much, Olu, for very insightful conversation, for the insights. I really appreciate it. I've enjoyed having this conversation with you. Probably we'll be having another conversation soon again.
I hope so.
And to you, the listener, and to you watching, I want to say thank you so much for your time. I hope you've learned a thing or two. Feel free to share this with people in your network. and take conscious choices when next you decide on what to buy, or when you explore, use the digital landscape altogether. My name is Seyifunmi Adebote. It's been a pleasure hosting this podcast. Many thanks to the team, Ajibola, Ayo, and Wonderful, that has made this possible. Finally, I want to say thank you again to the UK government for funds and resources to make this podcast possible. Till the next time, take care of yourself and take care of the environment. Thank you very much for joining us on this episode of GreenBytes Wednesday. This podcast is brought to you by Area I under the Scale Initiative, thanks to funding from the UK government through the Digital Access Program. Have you learned something new? Please share with your network, share with your friends, as I look forward to hosting you on yet another episode of GreenBytes Wednesday next week. Follow us on our social media platforms, check out our courses, test yourself, see how much you know, how much you're learning when it comes to digital and sustainability ecosystem in Nigeria. And I should remind you that as you balance your knowledge of digital ecosystem, also remember to stay committed to a shared and sustainable planet. My name is Seyifunmi Adebote. Bye for now.